My name is Frederick Ade, and I'm a postgraduate associate here at the Environmental Leadership and Training Initiative, or ELTI. ELTI is an initiative of the Yale School of the Environment focused on capacity development for conservation and restoration of tropical forest landscapes. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Nicole Israel-Meyer, ELTI's online training associate, and Abby York, ELTI's programs administrator. We are excited to welcome you to the second session of our four-part webinar series titled The Evolving Role of Biodiversity Credits in Global Conservation. So last week, we discussed the theme, Biodiversity Credits Market Scope and Demands. Today, we will talk about Biodiversity Credits Project Design. On April 17th, the following week, we will challenge you to think about the practical considerations that inform biodiversity markets. And on April 24th, we will wrap up with monitoring and verification of biodiversity credits projects. Each session is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. I am super excited, and I know you are too. So without wasting much time, I'll pass it on to Nicole Israel-Meyer, one of ELTI's student fellows, a Master of Environmental Management student at the Yale School of the Environment, and the moderator for today's session. Nicole.
Hi, thank you, Fred, and thank you. Welcome, everybody. So as you mentioned, today we will be discussing how to design biodiversity credit projects with two panelists. We are here with Mariana Sarmiento, the founder and CEO of Terrasos, and R.J. Mishr, an independent consultant for nature-based solutions. So here's an outline for today's agenda. First, you will hear each presenter's pre-recorded talk. In order to have subtitles, prepare for any type of internet connectivity variability, and make sure that we edited for time, our speakers kindly pre-recorded their talks. Once both presentations have been shown, we will have a live question and answer session. Finally, we will close with a few announcements to let you know what is coming up in the next webinar series, and we'll be closing right around 10 a.m. Eastern Time. So first, I have the pleasure to introduce Mariana Sarmiento. Mariana is the founder and CEO of Terrasos, Colombia's leading company in developing innovative environmental solutions for conservation and restoration. She holds a master's degree in environmental policy and management from Yale University and has an academic background in political science and environmental studies from Tulane University. Mariana is a member of the High Integrity Biodiversity Credit Panel and serves on the steering committee for the Biodiversity Credit Alliance. In 2013, she founded Terrasos with the vision of driving social, economic, and ecological impacts in Colombia. Since then, the company has positively influenced over 50,000 hectares across the country, providing organizations with efficient, effective, and secure investment opportunities in biodiversity. Mariana is known for her curiosity, optimism, and strong work ethic. Outside of her professional endeavors, she is the proud mother of two wonderful daughters, Alicia and Isabel. Thank you so much for joining us, Mariana. Mariana, while our team is getting the video up, would you mind getting off mute and showing your camera to say hello to everyone?
Hi, everybody. Pleasure to be here with everyone, and keen to any thoughts and questions that you may have regarding some of the work that we're doing and the process that we've laid out.
Great, thank you so much. And without much further ado, Emmy, I think we're ready to have it played.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mariana Sarmiento. I'm the CEO of Terrasos, and Terrasos is a Colombian-based company that has dedicated pretty much its life, the last 10 years, to figuring out models that bring private investment into biodiversity conservation. And in that process, we issue biodiversity credits for compliance purposes, but also for the voluntary market. So today, my goal is to share with you a little bit about, what are the different use cases for biodiversity credits, and also what are the basic steps for designing a biodiversity credit project. And just to keep in mind, as I go through the presentation, I'll be taking an example that uses the Terrasos Biodiversity Credit Protocol, but those same steps would apply to any kind of project design process, regardless of the methodology. So the first thing is, what are the use case for biodiversity credits that we've seen so far and that we have examples from? Clearly, environmental agencies that are needing or that are requiring companies that have environmental licenses or permits that need to compensate for damage to biodiversity. Also, financial institutions requiring the compliance with Performance Standard 6, which is related to no net loss of biodiversity. But also financial institutions and investors that are seeking nature positive investments. So they'll ask their clients to deliver on projects that will get them closer to a nature positive agenda. Also market demands and interest group demands, and that can come from either shareholders or clients, and then philanthropic use. So biodiversity credits are a performance-based instrument, so it's a pay for results, and there is philanthropy that would benefit from these kinds of models, because they're only, I guess, paying once the results are actually met. And if we look at it in terms of a diagram, we like to separate these in two types of categories: mandatory, which is environmental regulation, and financial requirements, like contractual requirements. So it's not mandatory in the sense that it's not regulatory, but these do become contractual requirements. It's expected that different agents will do it, and the reason, again, is not just delivery of Performance Standard 6, but also what we're beginning to see is lenders, for example, that will offer better interest rates if there is a delivery of a ecological gain or ecological lift in relation to biodiversity. And then there's the voluntary, which comes from these types of sources. Again, as TNFD becomes more standardized, as GRI becomes more standardized, it's questionable whether this is actually voluntary. But generally speaking, these are the drivers, and these are the reasons why different types of companies or different types of stakeholders would buy biodiversity credits. We've also included public sector. We see this as an opportunity, especially in developing countries in hard to reach areas where governments have a tough time delivering government services, but they need to somehow promote payment for ecosystem services projects. Now, before we get into how to design a project or the different steps, I thought it'd be useful for everybody to understand what the value chain is and what the different steps are. So there's a first moment where the landowner or the community, along with the project developer, if they're not the same, kind of come together and they decide, and they have discussions and conversations about how they can partner into developing a project. Landowners or communities are typically putting forward the natural asset, and therefore, in our case, we consider them and treat them as investors. They're the first investor that we need to convince that this is a good idea and a good investment of their asset. But also communities not just provide the natural asset, but then become the workforce and the labor force of these projects. Then there is the involvement of a technical expert that will do the actual project document. This is often times done hand in hand with the landowner and community. And once that's set up, then there's a conversation with investors in terms of the opportunity, okay? Once the project is designed and structured and basic contractual agreements are in place, the project is written, and it's registered with a third-party registry. In our case, Colombia has a habitat banking program, and all our projects that issue biodiversity credits in Colombia are also registered with the Ministry of Environment. So you undergo that registration process, which again, it can be a third-party registry or a government registry. And then there's a third-party verifier and validator that's involved in the process. Once it's registered, then that's when sales begin. And we'll go through how credits are released, because you can only sell, what you've released, even though you can also do forward contracts. But registering the documents in the projects becomes an essential moment within this process. And then finally, then you can start talking about transactions. So the first thing is, what are eligible projects? So far, projects that are eligible are in the category are preservation activities, so actions or activities to protect and maintain the natural state of biodiversity, and restoration activities. There are several organizations and groups that are thinking about how, for example, agroforestry systems can be considered for biocredit projects. But I would say that these are the main two activities that would enter into any biocredit kind of system. Then the question is, is the project additional? Again, different methodologies will have probably different questions to guide this analysis. But here is a few, that we've included and that we use in order to define whether a project is eligible or not. One would be, does it generate additional profits that weren't available before, right? Are you generating a new source of revenue as a result of the activities that you're going to implement? Does it prevent biodiversity loss? Can you demonstrate that it's actually prevented biodiversity loss? Is it contributing to reducing investment barriers into maintaining ecosystems? Does it reduce institutional barriers in that area? Does it reduce technological barriers? Does it reduce barriers related to local traditions? Does it reduce environmental barriers? So does somehow the project contribute to improving soil health and therefore enable an ecological restoration process? Does it reduce, social barriers? Does it reduce barriers to tenure and property rights issues? Oftentimes, these kinds of projects will actually help in that process of communities acquiring their property rights. And then, finally, does it improve functional connectivity for key species within an ecosystem? So these are the types of questions that you could ask. And I think the important thing here is that when we're talking about biodiversity, it's not just about a demonstrable ecological lift based on ecological conditions, but here social and cultural issues are an important thing to analyze when we're talking about additionality. So once we've determined that the activities are eligible and that it is additional, then we start developing the project. And it starts always with a very strong due diligence on the landowners, on the land title, which is different, but also potential risks to the viability of the project. So the first thing that we do is an opportunity analysis. And here we're taking an example of one of our current projects. which is it's a relatively small project. It's not community-owned land. This is privately owned land, and it has sustainable production system and conservation areas. Here we did, we've always kind of worked with different layers to figure out feasibility. And here we analyze things such as land use, climate change vulnerability, land prices. So the way that biodiversity credits are priced in our case is based on, in the first place, the cost of implementation and management and the opportunity cost, because at the end of the day, it's access to land. The size of the project area matters. We will not work with anything under 100 hectares. However, that doesn't mean that we can't put different properties together. So if we can create kind of a group project of 300 and plus hectares, then it's a viable project for us. In this case, so first we're just looking at biophysical characteristics and legal and economic characteristics of that site. Then we're trying to address economic feasibility. In the case of Colombia, there's a regulatory biodiversity compensation law, but there's also a water use compensation law. And there are potential voluntary contributions that could be made by different types of companies. So we look at where that project is, if there are any potential clients that could result from compensation requirements, and also if there are any companies who would be interested in investing in ecological restoration or conservation because of their value chains. We do a land title due diligence. And here what's important is that we're not just looking at the land title, but we're also looking at reputation of landowners. And here having very good local experts that understand land titling and land titling risks is instrumental. This isn't something that somebody that doesn't have the local context can do. You don't want to submit any of the investors, lenders, partners to reputational risk because you ended up with doing a project in an area that was at some point a part of a deal that resulted from illegal activities. Every due diligence process also has a strong on-site due diligence where we're not just looking at infrastructure, but also potential risks from landowners or from surrounding communities. The type of things that we're always looking out for, and this also becomes very important because the first assessment that we do is a land cover assessment. So this is kind of that first step of really understanding the site so that when we are using remote sensing, we can calibrate quite fast, whether what we're seeing or what the computers are telling us, I guess, and the models are telling us are true to what's really there. In this case, we're identifying, what are the areas that are going to be planted. This is one of those areas. What are some additional complementary revenue sources that are already existing within the site or that could be complemented? Here, for example, there are some beehives. So, can we add more, or is this a risk also to the project, etc.? We look at threats, what are the types of threats that could jeopardize, again, the ecological outcomes. In this property, for example, we identified that, there are some tracks hunting related. So that's something that we'll need to work on. There's also some exotic species within the site that we need to figure out how they're going to be included or addressed in the management plan. Again, what's the impact of the beekeeping that's going on? And waste disposal issues, which is something that we can work with the communities, but it's something that we're going to have to work on. And then once we've collected this information, we're able to do an initial financial model. And that financial model, what it does, it's a 30-year budgeting exercise where we need to really understand what are the activities that are going to be implemented and that will help us manage those threats that already exist. And then what are the activities that are going to be implemented in order to really ensure that we can demonstrate ecological lift. In this site in particular, there's an ecological restoration process that will occur. And then, we budget all this out again for 30 years. The heavy activities will typically happen between the first 5 and 7 years. And that'll give us an initial estimate of, what would be a floor price for those credits. The second part is, the financial, and that all depends not just on the budget, but also then the cash flows, which are related to the credit release schedules, which I'll explain in a second. We submit everything to a third party, some of the land negotiations. And then in this case, if we're talking about a voluntary unit, we're going to pretend that we're going to issue TBUs, right? Which is a Terrasos biodiversity unit. Each TBU is 10 square meters for at least 20 years of a preserved and restored ecosystem. And then, so the first thing that we're going to figure out is how many TBUs this project can issue. In order to do that, we take into account clearly the area of the site, total project area, the conservation status of that ecosystem. So the more threatened the ecosystem is, then the more points it will get, how you're contributing to ecological connectivity, community engagement, project duration, and conservation activities. And then that'll eventually give us, the number of credits that a project can issue. I'm not going to go through the details of this, but you will have these slides. And here's just an example, of a project that started out with 100 hectares. And if everything was perfect, a project could issue 100,000 hectares, 100,000 TBUs. In this case, when you apply all the different factors, this project can issue 66,600 hectares, TBUs, I'm sorry. Once you figured out how many units the project can issue, then there's another aspect, which is how are these credits going to be released so that they can be sold. And in the TBU system, there are ecological performance milestones and then management milestones. So we map key ecological performance milestones and key management milestones across, 15 years of the project or 20 years of the project. And those key milestones will become when the time that where credits can be released if it's verified and validated. So this is what I've been talking. And in this case, for example, right, this is 100% of all the units. 20% of those units will be released for sale once the land technical and all the assurances and the operation and maintenance plan are put in place and the project is registered, for example. Then the next 20% would be released once we've achieved certain management and ecological milestones, which would be part of the management plan that goes into the project document, so on and so forth, until that last batch, which is released once all the performance indicators and all the milestones have been met. This is an example of some of the ecological performance indicators that would be included into a project. Once all of this is, you figured this out, then you start writing, the project document. These are, kind of the main chapters of that document. And here it's kind of the general process again: information gathering, baseline. You go do your baseline. You define what the management actions are going to be. And then in the process of preparing that registration document, you define, the monitoring protocol and the KPIs of that project, which will be key, because that's what will define when you can release credits that are for sale. In this case, again, we're submitting this to the ministry as well, because the government has a habitat banking registration process. But in addition to that, if this were going to issue voluntary credits under the TBU protocol, we would register this with, one of the two third-party registries that we work with, which is Region and BioTrust. So that's, and right now you can access all our projects on our website also, and this is kind of what appears. And then one important thing is, once the project has been registered, and it's a project that it's viable, there's always this question of permanence. How are you going to make sure that if the landowner dies, then the project is still going to be able to, that it's not going to die, I guess, at the same time. So what, in the US, you have easements, conservation easements. In Colombia, we have usufructs or usufructos, or also a type of like an ecological easement, which is called the servidumbre ecológica. And in other countries, you're going to have another instrument, but it's very important that we secure the land title in relation to kind of that conservation process, so that it does withstand time. And then once the land title has been affected, once the project is registered and all the contracts are signed, then you're ready to begin execution and implementation, and hopefully get to that first milestone where you can sell credits. Again, you can always do forward contracts. So that's a commitment from a potential buyer, that once you reach those milestones, they will buy those credits from you, or sometimes they will pre-finance. But that would be kind of another part of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana. Great presentation, and thank you, everybody that has been asking questions. We have all been noting them down. I know that we're going to have a really, really fruitful Q&A session. Next, we're going to be moving on to Sanjay's presentation. Sanjay Mishr is an impact-driven professional specializing in nature-based solutions, NBS, corporate sustainability, and nature climate finance. Over a decade of international experience across Liberia, Ghana, and India and the EU, he supports companies and project developers in conducting due diligence and developing investable, reportable, and auditable sustainability strategies. His experience spans carbon portfolio management, sustainable forest management, biodiversity integration, and regulatory compliance, aligning projects with science-based target initiatives, science-based target network, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, and Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, among others. In his recent role at Cairns, he advanced nature as an asset class through carbon finance solutions. He is a Yale ELTI Tropical Forest Landscapes Certificate Program alumni from the 2023-2024 cohort. Currently, he's working as an independent consultant where he bridges sustainability and business, crafting high-integrity NBS initiatives that deliver measurable benefits for nature, communities, and investors.
So welcome, everyone.
today's session, we will be diving deep into mainly on how to design biodiversity credit projects that are credible, robust, and impactful. In today's session, we will briefly discuss different scheme design trends, key attributes of some successful projects, understand the life cycle of a high integrity biodiversity project, explore as an example Vera's Estivista nature framework, and walk through some of the steps to create a high integrity project, discussing how nature credit accounting works, and finally highlight some of the key implementation challenges and potential solutions. Let's begin with the current trends in the biodiversity credit scheme. First of all, the most common unit for the biodiversity credit, it remains 1 hectare of restored or conserved land. Crediting period varies significantly across different schemes, reflecting diverse ecological and economic contexts. Interestingly, all credible schemes mandate, or soon they are at least planning to be to provide independent third-party verification to ensure that whatever biodiversity outcomes are reliable. Additionally, some of the schemes are heavily involved in and they're focusing on indigenous people and local community, with approximately 75% of the projects involving them due to their continuous connections with this landscape. Terrestrial ecosystem, again, are dominating the whole ecosystem. And through coastal, some of the coastal and freshwater ecosystem are also kind of gaining some momentum very lately. Lastly, combining biodiversity credit with the carbon credit schemes is also very trending. So kind of project developers, they love to stack them or bundle those projects, and it's becoming common in the market right now. Some of the key attributes of the project, so as highlighted by World Economic Forum, you see that there are 3 examples here, and so area might differ from hectares to meter square depending on the ecosystem. It could be restoration, conservation, or and if you are looking at the improvement or avoided loss, so you are trying to increase the species, let's say, which is extinct, or which is endangered, or at least some keystone species in that area. So you are trying to increase their number above the baseline. Permanence is to be 30 years at least. Some ecosystem types, let's say it is focusing on boreal forest. For example, the keystone species in boreal forest is caribou. So it is focusing maybe on increasing their number above the baseline, and also then focus on the community inclusion. So robust benefit sharing mechanisms, FPIC, so free prior informed consent with the local communities is very much necessary. So these are some of the key attributes of the project. And then we will move on to the next slide, which is project life cycle. So it starts from feasibility assessment, confirming that legal rights and equitable benefit sharing with the indigenous people and local communities. Next, during the design and financing phase, projects must demonstrate the additionality, that there is a clear biodiversity beyond the baseline. So those benefits have to be demonstrated. Permanence, so ensuring long-term sustainability of the project, managing different leakage risks, so avoiding displacement of negative impacts. And the project concept phase emphasizes mainly on transparency, ensuring all processes are clearly demonstrated. Then it goes on to the validation phase. So you carry out an independent validation of the project design. So upon successful assessment, the project is validated, and then it is formally sent to the registry for registration. And during the implementation and monitoring phase, it's continuously you monitor the changes that is happening in the ecosystem that you are restoring or conserving. You record all the data, and you report that data with the verification validation body, which then kind of verifies the information and ensures that all outcomes align with the initial promises that you did in your project design. Finally, credits are issued, and ultimately they are being retired by registries or companies which are purchasing them, so that you ensure full accountability and integrity. The next slide is about Vera's Estivista framework. So it has nature credits, and it has another form of nature stewardship certificates.
So the difference between these two is that in the first one, you see that you are creating an impact in comparison to the crediting baseline of the project, and you are considering that in the term of quality hectares. So that is condition adjusted area. And so you are kind of creating the biodiversity outcome based on a timeline or a crediting period of 5 year, 10 year, or 15 year, 20 year, or 30 year. And then you are measuring these changes and these outcomes as the difference between the project intervention and the crediting baseline. And by doing so, you are kind of avoiding the loss of biodiversity, or you are kind of restoring the biodiversity. Whereas nature stewardship certificates, which is still under development by Vera, it's kind of also condition adjusted. And it is considering that you are managing or conserving the management or the management outcomes of the project. You are maintaining the intact biodiversity throughout the time period. So starting from year 0 to year 5, you have maintained constant number of species in that area, or constant number of trees that you have planted. You are maintaining that throughout the project period. Going on to the next slide is the key design objectives of Vera's ST framework. So mainly here, these core objectives of the Vera's ST nature framework focus on ensuring scientifically credible biodiversity outcomes, equitable benefits to the local community, transparent and standardized accounting methods, and strong governance practices to build trust among the investors, communities, and also different regulatory bodies as such. Going on to the next slide. So what are different steps in designing a high integrity biodiversity credit project according to the nature framework? So firstly, define a clear biodiversity conservation objective and measurable outcome. So defining the project start date and a clear crediting period, and verifying those outcomes at least every 5 years. Project has to be, so conduct the baseline assessment, understand what's existing biodiversity condition in that area, and then accordingly you decide what additionality you want to create. So demonstrating regulatory surplus, that the project is not mandated by law, demonstrating financial additionality, that the project would not have happened without the biodiversity finance, and also providing evidence that this kind of project is not already credited under another program. Also clearly demonstrating different sustainable development objectives, mapping different project activities. So throughout the whole theory of change is also kind of analyzed. Engaging with the stakeholders is another thing that we discuss. Transparent benefit sharing mechanism is another important aspect. And then last two main objectives are net positive biodiversity outcome. So maintain and monitor the biodiversity outcome and account for any kind of reversal that is occurring in the project throughout the project period. So you have to maintain the sustainability of the project for the defined crediting period. So it could be 40 year, 30 year, or whatsoever, depending on the project scenario. And also then you are kind of maintaining at least 20% of the nature credit as buffer pool in case of any potential risk of reversals that are happening in the area due to some natural hazards or fire, maybe such incidents. And finally, we are again constantly discussing, since it's very localized in its nature. So all these projects are connected very closely with the local communities, indigenous people. So also there is local environment where a lot of native species are growing. So you kind of have to focus on providing the minimum social and environmental safeguards. How do you account the nature credits? So as I discussed, you define the area, which is the extent of the project in hectares. You multiply that with the condition of the area. So quality of the biodiversity that is present, and that is defined based on different indicators. For example, species richness is one of the indicator, abundance of the species, another indicator. So you multiply that and you calculate that into the total quality hectares. And this again, the whole accounting process goes hand in hand with the significance of the project. So significance that you are differentiating the project and nature credits based on how you are contributing to the global biodiversity framework. So preserving, restoring, conserving, and reducing the ecosystem services and ecosystem losses that are happening. Challenges and solution in the implementing biodiversity solution projects. So the main challenge that the first one we see is defining and measuring the biodiversity. Since there are no single metrics, there's lack of standardization, and it is very localized in nature. So there are difficulties in measuring the biodiversity outcomes, or at least monitoring them for a long period of time. And the second one is, of course, very sophisticated technologies that can help us scale the project. So you need a robust monitoring, reporting, and verification framework, at least a digitized one, so that you can monitor the project over a large area and scale that with a constant. And that means you are adding some hectares after every maybe 10-15 years. You can add some of the areas into the existing project so that it is kind of scaling properly. So for that, I think most existing conservation technologies are out there, and some of the basic mature technologies that we have, for example, camera trap databases where we refer different indicators and data. And now most advanced stages, I mean, there is higher impact but less immature technology. Immature technologies are there, for example, telemetry, eDNA, modeling, sensor network photogrammetry. This kind of advanced technologies are also kind of developing. So in future, we are going to see that this is going to provide us a more robust framework around MRV10. The third challenge that we see is the market confidence and financial viability, low demand, unclear valuation, uncertainties around project outcomes, greenwashing, ethical questions about intrinsic value of the nature, social and governance challenges. So sometimes overlooking the IPLC rights, a lack of inclusive participation, inconsistent policies, a need for a robust legal frameworks to ensure compliance. And these two challenges, at least, for the market and financial viability one, we need a nature-focused transition finance, which is very important because private investors, large private investors, has their own interest whenever they are putting the money in the project. They have different set of objectives, whereas effective implementation of the conservation or restoration activity is a long-term game in the end. So putting a proper trade-off and balance is very important here. And to maintain those synergies, we need to focus on how we can create market-led governance regimes. We can create marketability of the product, also reducing the transaction costs that are happening, properly consulting the IPLCs, having a proper consultation on the ground is also very important. A need for a robust legal frameworks is really necessary, that you are liaising and kind of complying with the local laws is also very important. So yeah, thank you for your attention, and please feel free to reach out to me in case you have any questions, suggestion, or any ideas to discuss. This is my email address, and thank you for joining today's session.
Wow, great. Thank you so much, Sanjay. That was a very interesting presentation. Now we're into the Q&A session. We have a little less than 15 minutes, so I'm really excited to be able to take some time to delve deeper. Thank you to everybody that has been asking questions, and thank you, Mariana and Sanjay. I know you have all already been working on answering some of those questions through the Q&A function. So I wanted to start off first with a question that I had that I noticed both of you had talked about, and then we'll be reviewing some of the other questions that have been coming in. And this actually was, I know somebody else also had a question around additionality, because both of you talked about the importance of additionality and proving that, implementing these biodiversity credit schemes will be contributing to the conservation of the area. And I know that in the carbon credit markets, proving additionality has also been a really big challenge. So really curious to hear more and, expand on what you already talked about in some of the ways that Terrasos or organizations or different consulting projects that you have seen have tried to undertake some of these issues? And what are some of the advances that you've seen, or where do you see that going? Mariana, would you like to go first?
Sure, Nicole. So in the case of, so I think to answer this question, we need to first start out by by understanding what it is that we're trying to do, right? So we're trying to maintain or improve biodiversity over the long term. Yeah. So again, 20, 30 years. And in that sense, the implementation context is very relevant. So tropical belt countries, for example, there is a latent threat that the standing biodiversity is going to be impacted and affected in the next, over the course of the next 10, 15 years. In addition to restoration needs, and in some other contexts where you have really good protected area systems, and what we're trying to focus on is really restoration. Yeah, so depending on the context, that'll determine kind of the, the applicability, the viability of the management actions. In our case, we do think that biodiversity credits should be used for maintenance, right, of biodiversity, and that somehow the projects need to demonstrate that those latent threats are being addressed. So that's why sort of that additionality checklist talks about institutional barriers, talks about, financial or cultural barriers to conservation, or even legal barriers to conservation. Yeah. And then at the end of the day, the ultimate test of whether or not the project is contributing to biodiversity conservation is whether it's meeting those management and ecological milestones that are being determined. The issue of additionality has been, it's controversial, and some people have, different opinions about it. And I think part of it is very much because of, the questions around the carbon market. But to us, it always helps to go back to the goal. What are we trying to do? And in this particular case, we're trying to maintain critical ecological infrastructure that provides different types of ecosystem services. In some cases, it's ecosystems that are very important for carbon sinks or carbon sequestration, but in other cases, that's not the main ecological service that the ecosystem provides, but it's critical, for example, for resilience or, other types of things. So again, additionality to us, it's something that in the context of biodiversity needs to be looked at holistically, looking at ecological and, demonstrable, quantifiable ecological gains, but also within that context. And in that case, management actions demonstrating that you've been able, for example, to create a permanent endowment for a project, or that you've limited land use, through land use restrictions, are relevant, because the status quo is, there's absolute uncertainty as to what's going to happen with these sites. So I'll leave it there.
No, thank you so much, and very interesting. And I do think it's really important to note the differences between the biodiversity credits and carbon credits. And no, thank you so much. Sanjay, is there anything else that or what are your opinions? How would you like to complement that answer?
Mariana already answered in detail. What I would like to add here is that it is still evolving. I mean, it's not like carbon credits where you have set of guidelines on how to prove additionality. So in biodiversity credits, at least to the project developers or the corporate partners that I have been talking about, or at least those who are interested in, two basic principles that they follow, and they try to see the documentary evidence of those criterias. The first one is financial additionality, which means that the project is not financially viable in absence of the credit revenues. And secondly, that you are following the regulatory additionality, which means project activity is going beyond what is legally required in a locality or under a country's law or regulation. For example, a designated conservation area should not generate avoidance credit unless management actions address other project barriers as such. So you cannot go and implement a biodiversity project in already conserved area or a national park, which is already protected by law of a particular country. So those two basic principles, I think, are mostly looked by different corporates. But as I said, it is evolving, and we will see many more criteria being developed since this whole concept is very local in nature, and we have to take into consideration a lot of factors.
Thank you. Really interesting to add in the other points regarding additionality. I'm going to start looking and reviewing some questions. I'm going to do my best to consolidate some when there were overlapping themes. One question that was asked to the team and to the panel was regarding, the integration of blended finance models, and how does biodiversity accrediting fit into that scheme? We also had another question that was similar of bundling. I'm trying to find the exact question, but yeah, having, putting together bundles of carbon and biodiversity credits, or for example, carbon with biodiversity credits. I would say, just really curious to hear a little bit more about how you're seeing these different mechanisms, financial mechanisms that we've been hearing a lot about, and how does biodiversity crediting fit into that? Sanjay, we can have you start first.
Yeah, I mean, for now, at least we have seen carbon credit market, at least a lot of corporates are looking for different co-benefits in terms of ecosystem services outcomes. They are looking into different SDGs outcomes from the project, but they're not ready to completely pay that in a bundle. So a credit is worth a ton being avoided, or it's being removed from the atmosphere through different project activities. But it is as such still, I mean, they are looking to get different co-benefits, but at the same time, it is not being accounted properly into the credits price for the carbon. But yeah, I mean, this whole thing, in my opinion, would develop further, and we will see more and more bundling happening as we see some of the new standards coming up. For example, FSC has come up with, Forest Stewardship Council came up with this ecosystem services procedure. And this procedure already is kind of accounting not just carbon, but along with that, you can also claim several other impacts, including soil, biodiversity impact, or like different recreational activities. So they are kind of putting together all these things, and then they are kind of defining what would be the cost of that particular credit would be. And similar approaches are happening in terms of circular ecosystem approaches, where you kind of put a price on whatever negative impacts you are doing on the biodiversity or different ecosystems, and then you kind of try to put the equivalent amount of money into different restoration and conservation activity to try to go over the net biodiversity outcome. So yeah, this is going to evolve as we see new standards coming up, but I think this is very much needed because both things are affecting each other's outcome. Biodiversity, we have seen in many papers, biodiversity is enhancing carbon credit, or let's say carbon removal activities. So yeah, we will see that happening more and more. But I think Mariana maybe have some insights on if it is already happening somewhere.
Yeah, so I would just say, so for example, the projects that we've developed, they are blended finance models. So we started out, when we started working, the market the Colombian compliance market didn't exist yet. So when markets don't exist, and what we're doing is creating markets, which is what's happening right now, we're trying to shape markets. Blended finance models are a necessity, right? So what we've done is be able to use grant funding in the initial parts of the process. So for the site selection and the development of the projects, this is typically the riskiest and most time-consuming aspect of a project, up until when you have secured an initial offtake agreement. And then we've been able to leverage, equity investments from, I would say, concessional capital, right? So again, investors that are willing to be innovators in this space and to bet on models and bet on markets. And then our experience has been that once we've been able to demonstrate the model, once it's generating revenue, once we have multiple transactions that provide confidence to different parties, then you can begin to be a little bit more creative with project finance instruments. On the issue of bundling, I think this is really tricky because you get into this conversation of additionality, of financial additionality. In our case, the way that we price and that we encourage people to price biodiversity credits is where you're setting a price floor based on the cost of management plus the cost of capital, right? So in that case, I'm just going to give an example. If a credit costs $25, right? So $25, 10 square meters for 30 years, those $25 should be able to cover all the cost of management to deliver the outcomes that that project has set out. So having a carbon credit on top of that, if you're already covering the cost of management plus the cost of capital, really brings into question the financial additionality of that carbon credit. But and also your management is also going to address the carbon issue. We measure carbon in all of our biodiversity credits. So companies can account for the carbon that is being generated within our projects. We're just not issuing additional carbon credits. So, I think there will be some standards out there that will try and figure out ways of bundling or stacking more than bundling. I think stacking. I think adjacency is perfectly doable. So you can have a biocredit project here and then a carbon credit right next to it. And we've actually modeled that out, and it makes a lot of, technical and financial sense to set up a project like that under certain scenarios. But I would be very careful on, about stacking. I think one of the things that we're trying to protect the biodiversity market from is the reputational risk, right? Is for people to come down the road to question the ecological lift, the additionality that we've generated. And if you start stacking, it becomes, a gray area. So in this early stage, I would discourage people to do stacking. Let's try and get these first transactions. Let's try to demonstrate how the market works, how people can communicate, the outcomes that they're buying. At the end of the day, this is, outcome-based finance for biodiversity. That's what we're doing. So let's keep it simple for now. And that'll provide the right basis for a functional market down the road.
Thank you so much, Mariana, Sanjay. Really interesting. I can't believe how fast these 15 minutes have passed. I want to give you both about a minute to just close up with any final thoughts. There is a lot of questions that I know both of you have access to. So any question that you would like to address, any opportunities or trends you see in the market, in a minute or less. Sanjay, we'll start with you.
Yep. So, I mean, as we know already that the whole thing is evolving, and there is a lot of interest that is being shown by corporates on how they can kind of come in and help to kind of, let's say, compensate for their negative impacts that they are doing on the environment, biodiversity. And this whole thing is kind of being backed. And as I always feel that collaborations are a key thing here. Not one person or not one company can take care of everything, but there has to be collaboration between different standards, methodologies, between different stakeholders, data providers, government agencies, or IPLCs who are there on the ground. And these collaborations will then lead to issuing high integrity and high quality biodiversity credits that we are talking about. And so to do that, we need to kind of learn from our previous experiences from the carbon market, different failures, and try to reflect on that and try to come up with the solutions that will help us to achieve proper outcomes that we are looking forward to. Yeah, so thanks.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. Mariana, final thoughts?
So first of all, thank you to the ELTI team. Always a pleasure, to be part of anything that's related to, my school where my heart is. But I would say the following, right? When we got involved in this space, it was because our goal was to figure out tools to disintermediate biodiversity finance, and also to provide access to markets for nature custodians and environmental NGOs, right? That to us is the goal that needs to be pursued. And in order to be able to do that, and I think following on what Sanjay was saying, collaboration is key. We're all trying to figure it out. There are successful lessons learned from the past, from compliance markets. And we need to build on those things that have already proven to be successful. Again, I think in our case, just an invitation to reach out. If somehow you guys think that Terrasos can be helpful to you guys, we are beginning to do work in other countries across the world, in Brazil, in Peru, in Mexico, and really trying to think how the work that we're doing, which is beyond the methodologies, right? There are going to be many methodologies in this space, and we need to acknowledge that. The hardest part about the work that many of us in this call are doing is the implementation work, is getting the project design right, is getting the right contracts signed with the communities, with the operators, with the investors. That's where we need to make sure that we get it right. At the end of the day, we need to conserve land, protect land, restore land for the next generation, at least. That's the goal. And many methodologies are going to talk differently about how they propose that is measured. But the underlying issue is, can we get management right? Can we get project design and profit and benefit? And I wouldn't even say benefit, maybe, profit sharing and success sharing right. And in this case, we need to acknowledge that the first investor of these projects are the landowners and the custodians. And we need to change the narrative there. They're not beneficiaries, they are investors. right? And if these markets don't make sense for those investors, we're not going to make it work. Again, thank you very much. Terrasos open doors for anybody that wants to have another conversation. We are happy to test our tools in other places of the world. So I've put in my email, and to everybody, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Mariana, so much, Sanjay. I, once again, cannot believe how fast it all went by. I know we could have stayed here probably for another hour or two, keep on discussing. And on behalf of ELTI, we really want to thank you both, Sanjay, Mariana, for having put together these really interesting and informative presentations and answering all the questions that we could. Now I'll hand it back to Fred for some closing announcements.
Thanks so much, Nicole, for moderating this session. Admissions for the Tropical Forest Landscape online certificate program is still open and is open until April 28th, 2025. So if you are still applying, we will encourage you to submit your application on time. And if you have any questions, you can visit our website or email us at thetropicalcertificate@yale.edu. You can also visit the events page on our website and subscribe to our mailing list to receive all of our upcoming events. We are reminding you that all of our sessions are being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. So you can visit the YouTube channel to see the webinars. And last year we had one on agroforestry and carbon, so you can visit the website and watch that one too. Next week, that is April 17th, we will be joined by Professor Eli Fenichel, Ryan Sarsfield, to discuss the practical considerations that inform biodiversity markets. And we just shared the results from the poll, and it's very interesting to see how many people are interested in this topic. We have about 22% of whom this is their first time being introduced to the topic. We have about 63% who are already familiar with the team, but would like to learn more. About 13% says they are very familiar with the team, and we have 2% of our audience today who are experts. So it's very encouraging to see this, and it's good that we all come together to discuss such a topic. Next week will be very interesting and will challenge our thoughts a lot. So I would encourage you all to join us next week. And so finally, on behalf of the Webinar Planning Committee, I would like to extend our utmost gratitude to our speakers and to Dr. Florencia Montagnini and Dr. David Myers for helping us identify speakers for this series. And also a big thank you to Nicole for moderating today's session. Visit our website or send us an email for more information. Thank you and take care. See you at the same time next week.